Before anybody says anything, yes, I'm aware that a narcissist myself making a video on how everybody else is wrong about narcissism is very on the nose. Don't make fun of me, please hear me out. Anyways, Nameless Narcissist here, a simple man diagnosed with NPD trying to tell you what's going on in my head. Keep in mind I'm no clinician and I can just speak to my own experiences. If you enjoy this, please like, comment, and subscribe. So, obviously, as is discussed frequently on this channel, there are many misconceptions about pathological narcissism. Not that I blame anybody for having these misconceptions. You Google NPD and you get a list of stigma and myths that are unprecedented in any other mental disorder. So I made a quick list of what I personally find to be the most common myths about pathological narcissism in my interactions with others and in my and just like that I see on the internet. So let's get started. The first one, that we like ourselves. We're really starting off this list on a good note. I see a lot on the internet of like, oh, we think so highly of ourselves, we're so great, etc., etc., etc. And this is a very non-nuanced way to view this. One, we do not like ourselves. We very often hate ourselves, even if that's not super conscious. The reason why we engage in such grandiose and attention-seeking behaviors is because the parts of our brain that are connected with that connect reward and self, those two parts, they don't work right with each other. So we have to basically compensate for our self-hate by outside affirmation or comparing ourselves to other people. And for a lot of people who are pathologically narcissistic, won't be super conscious of that self-hate because they have been very effective at being able to get that outside gratification and prove themselves that they are better than people. But just because we're better than people, which makes us grandiose, does not make us not hate ourselves. I know that's hard to like understand. It's just like, I guess imagine like, I don't know, imagine like you're a cockroach, right? But you're the best cockroach. You're still a fucking cockroach and that probably sucks. That's kind of how it feels a lot of times. And then you think you're better than the other cockroaches. It's the whole thing. Yeah, so we do not like ourselves. I want to make that very clear. We suffer a lot because we don't like ourselves. We wouldn't be driven to the behaviors that we are if it weren't for the fact that we don't like ourselves. Even though that can be hard to spot. Anyways, so that brings me on to the next one now. Manipulation. Ooh, my favorite. I've said this before, I hate having to confront the stigma on manipulation because I kind of like being seen as a manipulative mastermind, if I'm being real, but we're not that smart, we're not that good at it, if I'm being honest. Yes, we engage in a lot of defense mechanisms and self-rationalizing behavior and defensive things, and a lot of what we do can be very purposeful, right? For example, if I want to tell somebody about my diagnosis, I'm not going to be like, oh, I'm comfortable with this person, I'm going to tell them about it. It's going to be like, okay, I think this is somebody I could trust with this information and I kind of want to talk about it. So maybe I'll drop like, oh, like mental health stuff. And then like, depending on how they react to that, I'll like mention like true crime or something to see if they like mention like those people having mental disorders like NPD or ASPD or BPD, because that'll kind of give me an idea of their stigmatization of it. Just kind of gathering information so I know it's safe to be able to basically share a portion of myself. And that could be seen as manipulative. I don't really view it that way, but I can kind of respect somebody's opinion if it was. A lot of it kind of is like that, you know. It's us trying to get information and see if we can like, if we can do that without them basically having a negative opinion of us. And when we're being, and also a lot of our manipulation really comes down to just denial, which I wouldn't even consider manipulation just because for us that's very real. Where like, it's like, oh no, I didn't do that because I didn't mean to do that, yada yada, or I've already rationalized it, I have a whole other narrative in my head. It's not like this big long con to hurt people, right? It's literally just this drive to regulate our self-esteem, and we never learned good ways to be able to get our needs, so we develop these maladaptive behaviors. I don't think there's very many people with NPD who genuinely want to hurt people. Maybe out of like revenge or like because they like crush my ego on purpose or something like that. And that's not good behaviors, they're just kind of knee-jerk. And in a similar vein, projection isn't what you think it is probably. Our projection at least, and I'm sure this has different forms, but how I personally experience it, I project because I'm a pathological narcissist. I know how my mind operates, and I kind of treat the world as if everybody else is operating like I do, because it's a delusion, but genuinely in my head, I think there's no way that anybody else could operate in ways that are different to the ways that I do. which is, I know, it's really contradictory. It's like, yeah, I'm better than everybody else, but I'm also the same as everybody else. It's a whole thing. But that's kind of where that's where you see a lot of people who are narcissistic saying that they're good manipulators, because that's just another defensive delusion of grandeur. But I mean, I'm sure there are some that are good at it, but you know, I don't think having MPD doesn't make you good at manipulation, and it also doesn't mean that you're manipulating necessarily in the way that people would expect you to, given what your behaviors are. Although I will say, if you count hiding the self manipulative, like I don't want people to know who I am, I feel like I have to put on this facade to get my self-esteem regulation needs met. If you consider that manipulation, then yeah, we're really manipulative, and that we're really good at. But that's just out of fear, because we think we're worthless and have nothing to offer people. Even if it is just subconscious. 3, that we don't suffer. I want to point. If I remember, I'll link the study that I linked to. Actually, no. Check out my other video that says that's called "Narcissism is More Deadly Than Cancer." Yes, I know it's a dramatic title, but dramatic cluster, whatever. We actually have an increased risk of suicide. People with cluster B disorders. According to a study in Quebec, measuring 8 million people, one out of the four, no, it was 20.3%, sorry, not one out of the four, but 20.3% of those people who died, who had cluster B disorders, was from suicide. And I don't know if this is controversial to say, but I think usually people who commit suicide are suffering at least a little bit. We also have increased risk of heart disease, of stroke. We are at a higher risk of having PTSD or developing PTSD, of ADHD, of other personality disorders, of anxiety and depression. We actually have higher levels of stress than people with generalized anxiety disorder, like latently, which is really interesting. But yeah, people with NPD suffer a lot. Number 4, we can change. Oh my God, I fucking despise this myth. Yes, we can change and we can be aware. Just because I'm aware of my pathological narcissism does not mean I'm not pathologically narcissistic. I was diagnosed. God, stop, believe me. But it actually, according to a study, you can check out my video, Narcissists Can Change. Over a 2-year period of treatment, 53% of people with pathological narcissism and diagnosed with NPD went into remission after those 2 years. So over half, and that's not even that's a pretty short length of treatment for a personality disorder. So you can imagine after 4 or 5 years, that's probably the majority of people who are pathologically narcissistic go into remission. And don't get me wrong, we are difficult people to treat, and because our egos are so sensitive, because we hate ourselves, and every time that you say something bad about us, it reminds us of everything bad we've ever thought about ourselves, and we get defensive. But we can change if we are willing to put in that effort. But I don't think it's as much of an NPD thing to not want to change as people think it is, because I mean, I'm sure we have all known normal people who have just done shitty things, and they literally cannot see why it was shitty, and they don't change. And that's a hurdle that everybody has to face. And people with NPD, it's a little bit worse, but I don't think it's very unique to pathological narcissism. Number 5, I see a lot people saying oh, the cold, emotionless narcissist, and people with NPD will often kind of try to lean into that because yeah, I'm cold. But no, we are very emotional. We struggle with emotional liability a lot. Yes, we have a really hard time identifying our emotions, so it presents as shame a lot. I mean, not shame, as anger a lot, but shame also. And we feel shame over losing control over ourselves and expressing emotions and letting people see those parts of us. So it can come off like we're cold, but we really aren't. We're part of the dramatic, erratic, and emotional cluster. We're very emotional. I'm completely emotionally dysregulated. It's awful. And if you have NPD, you're likely going to have traits of other personality disorders, so like BPD especially. There's a study once done that showed that 25% of people with NPD had comorbid borderline personality disorder, which is, ooh, that's rough. But much like them, we're very similar in that we have very high emotional dysregulation. And I mean, to the extent that once I heard NPD described as borderline personality disorder with a grandiose shell, which, as I've said, has tracked with my experience a lot. When that grandiosity falls through, ooh, it's not pretty. Empathy. So this one's a little more complicated. This goes along with the emotionality portion. We do not have a complete lack of empathy. We have empathy impairment, and usually how this presents is that we have deficits in our affective empathy, and we have a hard time understanding how our hurtful behaviors hurt other people because of that projection. Because we assume that they'll react like we would. And if we wouldn't act like that, then we're like, fucking, why would that hurt you? Or I understand why it would hurt you. This is where you're going to see a little bit of toxic here. Some of the times I understand why it would hurt somebody, but I think it's dumb that they got hurt by it because it's not why I would be hurt by it. And that's kind of how that presents a lot. But I am kind of an extreme case when it comes to a lack of effective empathy. Like, I basically have zilch. I felt effective empathy once, so I know it's possible, and I know that can probably be changed at some point. And it was terrifying. I don't know how you people deal with that. Like, I was like, oh my God, why am I mad? Am I annoyed at this person? I'm confused. And honestly, because of our hard time identifying our emotions, it wouldn't surprise me if more people with NPD do experience more effective empathy than they think. But because of that, sorry, people love interrupting me. Anyways, because of that confusion with what we were feeling ourselves, if we were to feel somebody else's emotions, I can easily see in some cases, they have more effective empathy than they think, but they don't know where that emotion is or where it's coming from, and that just leads to more dysregulation, clearly. So, anyways, moving on. We can love. I see this a lot. No, narcissists can't love, blah, blah, blah. One, that brings up a convoluted question, because what is love? You know, who's to say that any one subjective experience of love is more valid than any other subjective experience of love? Two, we desperately crave love because we were, robbed of it as children, and we're constantly trying to, get what we feel like we never got. But the struggle is that, because we never learned how to love properly, and because we view everything through this grandiose lens of ours, it's hard for us to recognize love for how it is. And there's the added thing of oh, if this person sees who I really am, they'll hate me, believe me. Which is hard to deal with, but we desperately do want to love, and we can. And I know a lot of people with NPD, I've seen that they do love, if nothing else, in their own way. They definitely do love, and they take care of people that they care about. I care about people in my own way, and it may not be recognizable to a lot of people as how they would experience it, but I try to make my outward interactions appear to be the best way to, maybe I don't get anything out of it, but I'm like, okay, but logically I care about this person, this is somebody in my life, I should take care of them. And I try to give them the things that they need, even if I'm not the best at it, right? 7 is kind of this one's hard to explain. It's there's this kind of, because this is more of a feeling I get from reading a lot of these than outright saying it, but it feels like a lot of people think this is a choice. It's not. There's actually neurological reasons why we behave like this. I brought the one study that showed that the parts of the brain that connected reward and the self weren't as well connected as they should be in normal patients. And there's some studies showing that we have a hypersensitivity to social rejection and stuff like that. We do have maladaptive ways of handling all of this stuff, but the causes are not at all our choice. And over time, when these ways of dealing with it get so ingrained, they're hard to break. You can, but we're not thinking oh, how can I choose to be a narcissistic piece of shit? We're thinking, how can I get my needs met? How can I get the needs met that because my brain's weird, I can't get on my own, I need from other people. I'm literally incapable of self-soothing. It's awful. If I'm an emotional wreck, I can't just make myself feel better, because I don't know why. It's really weird. It's something to do with being defined by other people, probably. Who knows? Number 8 is we're not sadistic. We are not obviously there's going to be some people with NPD who are sadistic, but it's not associated with NPD like people would think it is. It's a completely separate thing, basically. There's going to be normal people who are sadistic and people with NPD who are sadistic. There's nothing about NPD that says, oh, I want to go out and hurt people. Again, it can come off like that because we don't know the proper ways to get our needs met. But it's not my needs are, I need to hurt this person. It's, oh, maybe I'm getting really defensive because my ego feels threatened, and when my ego breaks down, I just fall apart. Or maybe I'm being dismissive of somebody because I forget that people can have these emotional connections to me, and I'm not feeling that because I never really do. I do sometimes, but it's fleeting. And I can forget how these things can be hurtful to people. Or black and white thinking. It's in the moment, I can completely hate somebody, but that doesn't mean I actually hate them, if that makes sense. I can only think of the bad qualities and how they're hurting me in that moment, But that's not to say that but like to me, those things are so separate. It's like I know that I'm getting super mad and angry for no reason, and usually I know I have to calm down and just like take a step away. But the black and white thinking, it's like I'll say these things that I mean in the moment, but like I don't actually think when I'm being rational. It's hard to explain, and I feel like it's even, I don't know, from like what I gather, it's harder to like explain to people how that kind of works who don't experience the black and white thinking and when they split on people. And yeah, like narcissistic rage is just fucking splitting. Like it's the same thing with the BPD kind of. It's just that our triggers are way different. Not way different, but they're pretty similar, but like there's distinctions. And okay, so number 9 is abuse. So, you know, I'm not going to get into why I don't personally like the term narcissistic abuse. I'm not saying that people who use it are like wrong, and I think there could be a place for it, but there's a lot of things surrounding it that makes that complicated. But there are no studies that establish any sort of actual link between NPD and abuse as of right now. If you have one, feel free to send it to me, because it's one that like I'm not very confident in. But from what I have found so far, no studies have linked abuse and NPD. I'm not saying that people with NPD don't hurt people. We definitely do. But again, it's not because we want to be abusive, not because we want to hurt people, but because we forget about other people's needs, because our own feels so overwhelming and we might not have healthy ways of getting those needs met. I'm not going to, and I would personally believe abuse is probably more common in NPD than with the general population, is what I'll say. But I'm sure there are I've heard so many people with NPD who have never abused anybody, who I know for facts haven't abused anybody. I personally, I have hurt people, and I've been a mess most of my life. I've hurt a lot of people, and I will fully own that. But that's not to say that's because of my NPD. That's because of how I handled my NPD. My NPD didn't make me do anything. I made the choices to handle my NPD, if that makes any sense. And which brings me to number 10, which I think is if you take nothing away from this video, this is the most important thing to take away. Every single person with NPD is different. Every single person. There are just a variety of presentations that this disorder has. Not just like not just if you're more grandiose or vulnerable presenting, but if you are a pathological narcissist, you have both of those things. But some people are going to have great insight. Some people won't have any insight into their action. Even though I articulate my narcissistic functioning really well, there's so many times in my life that I was like, why did I even do that? I don't even know what my motivations were. I remember, and it takes me years to figure it out sometimes. I remember Deanna Diamond was talking about some of her clients who, one of them was like this architect, and they were told, hey, don't talk to anybody about this project, especially not the press, it's secret, blah, blah, blah. And this guy, he went and talked to, there was a reporter, and he was like, hey, could you give me a statement as an anonymous person? And the guy did, and he went to therapy. He was like, I don't even know why I did that. Like, what? That was so stupid of me. Like, why would I risk my job like that? And then like they talked about it a little bit, and he's like, I guess it fed my grandiosity. Which, going back to us being super manipulative, we are often unaware of our motivations. We don't know why we're doing these things. Again, sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. There's some people that do, some people that don't. And also add on that, like, within cluster B, there's so much overlap that you're going to have a sprinkling of traits from the entire cluster, and maybe even outside of the clusters. And we're not this homogenous group of, assholes, of abusive assholes, effectively. There's some of us that are going to be great people. There's some of us that are going to be awful people. It's not related to NPD. It's how we handle it. And there's a lot of people out there who do want to change, and there's plenty that don't. And I will never defend the people who don't want to change, but I will defend NPD as a categorization, because one, I'm part of that categorization, so I better defend it. But also because, again, there's so many people out there who are just desperately trying to change, and this disorder causes them so many issues, not only in their life, but just personal suffering. It's not fun not being able to connect to people, not being able to experience some of these things that other people talk about so highly, to be neurotic all the time, always worried about my self-esteem regulation. It's not fun to hate myself. And I'm trusting that with more treatment and more time, I will get more and more better, hopefully. But I'm sure I'm always going to have NPD to some degree. You know what I mean? And that doesn't have to be a bad thing, if people would stop yelling at me about it. Anyways, that's all for this video. I hope if you're new here that you learned some things about pathological narcissism, or at least are open to learning about it and about the stigma itself. Because, you know, it's kind of hard to people to be, it's kind of hard for people to accept they have NPD when it's effectively the asshole disorder. I don't know if anybody went to you and was like, hey, you're a fucking asshole, and you don't even know them, and they're probably not going to react well to it. And that's why a lot of us don't react well being told we have NPD, because we're not assholes. Well, we try not to be, at least. Anyways, have a good day. Take your fucking meds.